Have you ever really taken the time to think about what it means to actually own gold? Not silver, gold. What does it mean? Is it money? Is it a luxury? And has the definition of what is a luxury changed over time? I think it's actually a really interesting question because when you think of the stacking community, again, one of the common mantras is that gold and silver are money, right? I mean, again, they will point to the history of gold and silver being used as a medium of transaction, being able to, get goods and services with gold and silver. But when you think about that, think back to the era, to the time that they're talking about. Many, many years ago, when gold and silver would have been transacted in their actual metals form, not representations of fiat that, stood for gold and silver, actual gold and silver. Okay, let's think about that. Now think about silver. You can think about silver being the transactional medium of the common man, right? The common person, having silver coinage, things like that, to be able to, spend, to be able to transact in, buy goods and services, pay for things. But think about gold. Did the average person have access to gold? Did they own gold? Was saving in gold even something that was attainable for the regular people? That's an interesting question. It's actually a really interesting question because I think that really depends. Now, at some point, you think of things like even mundane things, like jewelry, for example, that's made of gold versus bullion. Is there a difference? Is gold gold? I would argue that no, it's not. Gold isn't gold. Now, most of the gold jewelry that you see is plated in some fashion or, varying degrees of gold content. Whereas if you're buying bullion, obviously bullion is just gold, right? Now, there are alloys in there. I guess that's what you would call it, right? An alloy. Considering that, for example, the eagle's a mix of different metals, in it to strengthen it, things like that. But would the average person throughout history really have gold on them? Would they ever have any gold? Think about, let's say 1,000 years ago, right? Gold and silver were around, people transacted in them. But the average person have gold? In the times of the Bible, would gold be something that someone actually had? Or was it something more of a symbol that you knew stood for, riches, that kind of thing? I think, again, that's an interesting question to ask yourself. And so, again, on top of that, you have to ask yourself, is having gold in general a luxury? Is it not really money? Is it more a symbol that you've attained wealth, that you've attained status, that you've attained riches? I think that's actually really interesting. And this is brought on because I was actually watching a really interesting video from a random creator that I came across that was talking about what it is to buy, for example, luxury goods, luxury clothing, let's say, or luxury, let's say if you're female, handbags and dresses and belts or whatever, and how that has changed over time from what it was before. I think it's a really interesting concept because, for example, in the fashion industry, the idea of luxury, the idea of the quality of these brands, for example, let's say Gucci and Prada and Xenia and all these brands that as, high quality luxury goods, at one point in time, they really were extremely high quality luxury items. Why? Because not only were the materials and the craftsmanship of these kind of things, extremely high quality, but it was unique because it was made for you individually. Clothes were made for the person, not, mass produced under the brand label. So there was definitely a higher level of attention to detail for those kinds of goods. And again, those weren't the kind of thing that the everyday person would have, which is interesting. Again, when you tie it back to gold, for example, gold wouldn't be something that the average person would have. But the interesting thing, the way that, the part that I found really interesting about this video on, how the definition of luxury has changed. And part of that change was not driven by the consumer so much, but driven by these brands to convince you that even though you were getting lower quality and something that just really wasn't as desirable, that because it was associated with the quote unquote brand, that it was luxury. So part of that, for example, was some of the designers, for example, of very high quality, heritages, basically started to mass produce things under their label and still give that name associated with that high quality to t-shirts, sweatpants, athletic gear, different things that, were nothing to do with their original purpose. I think that's actually really interesting because it obviously has gotten buy-in from, the consumer. People buy crap with, brand name labels on it that was made in China, for dirt cheap, and they don't even understand that these items are not luxury items. They're crap. I mean, even when you look at the laws, this person in their video was talking about, the laws regarding, luxury goods, and how a lot of these, very high quality brand names actually have their goods manufactured elsewhere and then transported back to, let's say, Italy or France to have the labels put on, and that counts as being made in their country. So little things like that, really influence the public, really influence, you into thinking, hey, I'm getting this high quality item, when really it's far from. Not only that, but really the interesting thing to me was the concept that he kind of brought to light in his video, in that it's the brands themselves that went through the trouble of making, it seem like luxury was attainable to the common man. Hey, look, you can have this luxury item, you can have this, high quality garment or, bag or wallet or belt or whatever it is, even though you're not of that level, you haven't attained that level of wealth or, riches to be able to afford that kind of stuff. Very interesting. Because what it shows you is that mentality of kind of, making it for the common man, even though realistically that's not who these brands were meant for, was really just a profit motive. It was really something to sell you on the idea and get buy-in. Now think of things like gold bullion. Think of things like this. Is this money? I would argue no, it's not money. It's definitely not money. But because of that, because of the idea that's been sold that, these kind of things are money, so to speak, you don't realize that you're buying into a luxury. You are buying something that, has an added premium, has a cost to it, under the guise of it being something it's not. I think it's really interesting because one of the other aspects that this person touched on in their video was that, for example, in luxury brands, in, clothing, which was obviously the main topic of the video, that these brands had kind of really worked hard to convince the consumer that luxury wasn't about luxury anymore. It wasn't about quality. It wasn't about, a personalized experience. It wasn't about any of that stuff. It was about a feeling. It was about feeling like you were experiencing luxury. How does it make you feel? And that was really the biggest scam of all. And that was really interesting to me, because when you tie that back to gold and silver, again, the item itself is pretty standard, pretty straightforward. It doesn't mean the same thing it may have meant in the past. You as a regular person wouldn't have gold in the past. It was beyond your reach. But now, in the environment that we're in, you can buy gold bullion. You can attain gold bullion. But it doesn't mean the same thing. It will never mean the same thing that it did back then. And that is an interesting concept when you think of things like that. Again, this idea, I had never thought of it like that with regard to, fashion or things like that. I'm more mundane as far as, buying clothes and stuff like that. I guess most guys are. But the idea that they could change the paradigm from, hey, it's high quality, you're paying for the craftsmanship, you're paying for the, the design work that goes into these pieces, where every piece of clothing is made for the individual, and it's really a reflection of you, to now where these things are mass produced again in third world countries or second world countries for very low cost, and they throw a label on them, and it makes you think that you're buying something that was made in Italy or made in France or wherever, and it wasn't. Those same concepts apply to bullion. It's a very interesting parallel, but again, the idea is you've taken something that was unattainable in the past, high quality clothing, high quality merchandise, and you've made it available to the common man under the guise of it being something that it's not. Gold bullion is much the same. It's something that in the time where it may have represented money, it would have been unattainable for you. You wouldn't even have had any concept of owning gold because you wouldn't have had any. But now that you can, they sell it to you to make it seem like, hey, this is putting you into a class where, you really aren't. The reality is, it's not. But it's a very interesting concept and a different way to look at what gold and silver really is, as a product, not as money. If you get a chance, check out the video on the luxury items. It's a clothing type video, but the way the guy explains it is super interesting. And to see the parallels and to see the change and shift in what it was to be luxury is amazing.